I don't know where he is right now. Mel Waters. Mel, welcome to the program.
I'm here in the Pacific Northwest.
Somewhere in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
That'll do. First of all, it's great to hear from you, and I guess we heard from you, Mel, because, were you out somewhere when we did a rebroadcast of the original Mel's Hole thing?
Yeah, I guess this was last week sometime, and I was coming back from Nevada, and it turned out I get a lot of rides from truckers.
Uh-huh.
You might find this interesting. I look a hell of a lot like Willie Nelson.
Do you?
And people will come up to me, and particularly truckers, and say, "Do you know you look like Willie Nelson?"
Well, no kidding.
And then I tell them, no, I'm not Willie Nelson. I am Mel Waters.
February 21st, 1997. Coast to Coast AM. Famous radio host Art Bell, known for having many a mysterious and strange caller on his show, picked up the line to one Mel Waters, and the equally famous story of Mel's Hole was known. An enduring mystery to this day, the story of Mel Waters, though controversial in nature, was compelling to all who listened late into the morning. His first calls took place on the 21st and the 23rd, in which he described in detail a hole on his property that exhibited some strange properties. In the quaint town of Monastash Ridge, Washington, the property, which is adjacent to the Yakima firing range near the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, there was a pit, 9 feet wide with seemingly no bottom. The hole was known by both locals in surrounding areas as well as the Native American tribes in the region, and would frequently travel to it, but kept its exact location a closely guarded secret. The pit was used on the property as a dumping ground for locals, often throwing out their used appliances like fridges, tires, and in some cases, departed family pets. One story goes, a local had thrown their dead pet dog down the hole, and days later, the dog was seen again by the locals, alive and well with its collar on, as it had been when it passed. In a quote by Mr. Waters, he said, "Well, I mean, the normal thing to do is kinda like yell into it there and see an echo, and I've never heard an echo come out of that thing, and it's one of the first things I noticed about it. As usual, I brought my dogs with me, and they wouldn't go anywhere near the damn thing. They just went back to the Suburban and hung out over there. If I try to bring them there on a leash, they'll just dig their feet in. They don't want to go anywhere near that hole." Other visitors even took note of the fact that birds avoided flying directly over it, and no other small animals ever appeared near it. According to various reports, the only signs of wildlife were piles of bones strewn around the mouth of the pit. Mel had again called into Coast to Coast AM many times in 2000 and 2002, in which Mel described as many experiments in the pit, such as lowering a sinker attached to the end of fishing line to gauge the depth. The fishing line added up to over 15 miles deep, according to Mel. After sharing to Art Bell more and more about the mysterious hole, things began to get stranger, if that were even possible. According to Waters' story, after his first 2 calls into the radio show, the government tried seizing his property, including the hole. While Mel was out walking his land, he was approached by 2 men dressed in black suits who explained to Mel that a plane had crashed on his property and he wasn't allowed any further, which incensed Mel. After all, it was his property. He had never seen or heard a plane crash, which he absolutely would have heard. Mel had attempted to enter his property several times after the meeting and was denied access every time, which ended with a threat, stating that if he continued to try, he'd be arrested under the pretense of concealing a meth lab on his property. This made Mel all the more concerned, as he now questioned the authority of the men who seized his land. Later on, any military in the area denied all accusations. Ken Cooper, spokesman of the Yakima Army Training Center, dismissed it outright, saying that they're not hiding an 80,000-foot hole or an aviation accident, but were simply training as per usual. Assuming that Cooper could be of a higher rank than stated, such as Black Ops or even the infamous Men in Black, they very well could be in league with the suits that kicked Mel away. Not too long after, Mr. Waters was given the opportunity to lease his property in a strange turn of events by the government under a strict set of rules. The land and everything in it would be owned exclusively by them. Mel would be paid $250,000 monthly, and he was required to move out of the U.S. entirely, effective immediately. Waters took the offer and decided to leave. Him being a lover of wildlife, Waters used the generous leasing fees he had accrued to start a wombat rescue operation, and for the next 2 years he would live a fairly contented life in Australia. Homesickness eventually overtook him, and he decided to pack back up and move back to the United States. First off, his liberal leasing fees were immediately cut off, indicating to Waters that he had been under constant surveillance. Secondly, while riding on a bus to Olympia, Washington, soon after his plane touched the ground in America, Waters testified that he had witnessed a dispute between a fellow passenger and police officers. The officers allegedly removed Waters from the bus under the pretense that he had to sign a police statement confirming what he had seen. That would be the last thing he would remember for almost 2 weeks. Waters swore that the next thing he could recollect was stumbling around San Francisco in a stupor no less than 12 days after he was removed from the bus, with no clue as to how he got there. He further asserted that he had been physically beaten and that his rear molars had been extracted during his blackout. Waters further claimed that he had IV tracks on his arm. This convinced him that he had been drugged by the police, or more likely than not, government agents dressed as police. As if his life wasn't already enough of a downward spiral, Waters soon found that not only has his stipend been suspended, but that all of his assets had been frozen, and that his Australian rescue facility had been dismantled. Perplexed and fearing for his own life, Waters phoned his nephew, who wired him enough cash to take a bus back to Manastash Ridge. Back on his property, Waters was served with legal documents by what he referred to as Men in Black types, who indicated that his ownership of the land was in question due to modifications that had been made to the property and that the government would officially be taking control of the land from there on out. One of Waters' neighbors got a hold of him days later and told him that he had seen a large black van outside of Mel's house during his absence, and that dark-clad men had been ransacking the place. Waters felt sure that these were also shady Black Op agents. As if things weren't bad enough for Waters, he was officially presented with divorce papers, and even worse, diagnosed with esophageal cancer almost immediately afterwards. Now, at the end of his proverbial rope, Waters once again contacted the one sympathetic voice he could find, Art Bell. And in April of 2000, Waters once again spoke about his misadventures. He related his harrowing tale to the inquisitive masses and even recounted a story told to him by an old neighbor regarding the huge Stonehenge-like monoliths that were once said to surround the pit. And here it gets even weirder. The discovery of another hole. The remote locale of this second hole was said to be under the supervision of the Federal Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, and was, according to Waters, utilized by both Native Americans and members of the Basque community for grazing sheep. Waters later told Bell during one of his 5 on-air interviews that Basques claimed that the hole had been there since their community had been founded in the 1800s. Waters petitioned the curious Basques to help him in his continued experiments regarding the nature of these holes, and they obliged him. Some of these tests yielded results that were merely unusual, and one of them ended in an event that was nothing short of horrifying. The first experiments consisted of lowering a bucket of store-bought ice approximately 1,500 feet down the hole, with the test bucket remaining topside. When the team raised the bucket, they discovered that it had not melted, but what truly caught their attention was the fact that the ice was now warm to the touch, with a silica gel-like feel to it, and even more bizarrely, it actually became flammable. No one could explain this chemical change in the ice, but one of the men brought the ice home and filled his wood stove with it. He claimed that the burning ice burned for 3 months and seemed to have a strange penchant for sucking all the moisture out of the air around it. By the end of the winter, the wood stove had inexplicably plummeted through the floor of the man's shack, sinking 5 feet into the ground. Soon after, the entire hut was said to have dissolved into a fine wood particle dust. According to Waters, a group of unidentified, likely government-funded, researchers quickly descended upon the dissolute shack and attempted to raise the sunken wood stove. The men employed heavy chains and construction equipment, but were unsuccessful until they filled the crevice above the stove with water. Waters and other eyewitnesses claim that upon contact with the water, the chains fused to the wood stove, and the team was then able to lift it from its moistened tomb. The stove was swiftly secured to a large truck and taken away to an undisclosed locale. Now, while burning ice is strange, the following experiment would test even the limits of Waters' sanity. In an act of what must be construed as animal cruelty, Waters and his Baz cohorts then decided that a live subject was necessary for the next test, so they quickly snagged a sheep from one of the many nearby flocks and dragged it towards the hole. Waters claimed that the sheep became agitated when it approached, much like the reaction of his own dogs at the sight of the first hole, and that the petrified animal had to be stunned and shoved into a crate in order to subdue it. The men then began to lower the crate, and the poor creature awoke as it began its descent. Waters confirmed that the beast began thrashing violently in its crate and making sounds that can only be compared to shrieks of terror. The crate was purportedly lowered to a depth of approximately 1,500 feet, at which point the sheep's undulations and screams were silenced. That was when the metallic rim of the hole suddenly began to vibrate. Waters and company, no doubt startled by this development, backed away from the pit and allowed the unfortunate sheep to linger in the complete blackness of the crevice for no less than 30 minutes before they worked up the nerve to hoist the crate back up to the surface. It should come as no surprise that the animal was found dead inside the crate. Terror alone would have been enough to kill the poor beast, but when they cut the creature open for an impromptu autopsy, the men found that the sheep looked like it had been cooked from the inside. And if this wasn't disconcerting enough, Waters discovered a gelatinous tumor-like glob where the sheep's internal organs should have been. Waters removed the tumor, and that's when things started to get weird. Really weird. Some of the Basque men noticed that the tumor seemed to be moving of its own accord, as if something was pushing out from within. Waters decided that the tumor needed to be cut open, and one intrepid fellow did the deed, releasing a creature that Waters described as looking like a fetal seal, connected to the tumor inside the sheep with an umbilical cord. Waters went on to claim that this strange tumor seal had a haunting, human-like eyes which locked onto the experimenters. This creature from the abyss and its surface host stared at each other in stunned silence for the better part of 2 hours, before the sheep-born abomination apparently nodded at its would-be captors and dove back into the hole. The men then hurled the sheep carcass in with it. Instead of being mortified by this biological atrocity, Waters felt that the seal-like beast was filled with compassion, and he believed that his experience with this entity resulted in the total remission of his esophageal cancer. Waters further asserted that the seal-like entity made regular visits to the Basque shepherds who made camp near the hole and was even able to communicate with humans via portable radio. Sadly, efforts to record the creature's voice resulted only in a series of unintelligible, static-like sounds. Strange as the thing might have been, Waters claimed that the locals also began noticing a new species of brightly plumaged bird that seemed to be making its home around the new hole. At least 6 specimens of the bright red blue-beaked birds, which were quickly christened sunbirds, had been seen orbiting the fathomless pit since the sheep experiment. This, of course, begs the question, did the animal sacrifice performed by Waters and crew in the name of science unintentionally open a rift through which the fauna of another dimension can enter our own? Far-fetched as that may seem, presuming that anything Waters claims is true, then what other explanation is there? And if that doesn't prove to be the case, how long before larger predators follow these birds through the same opening? Maybe these friendly visits by the seal entity are soon to be followed by not-so-friendly visits from something much larger and potentially carnivorous. Waters publicly stated that he believed the bird came from deep within the hole, and he claimed that the locals had already concocted a myth wherein these birds were somehow responsible for the sheep's death, as well as the tumor that produced the seal creature. Waters, being more scientifically inclined, attempted to shoot down a bird so he could dissect it, but his efforts were a failure. Although he did manage to shoot one of the birds after a short while, and the avian anomaly righted itself and continued on its merry way. Waters later found 2 crumpled bullets below where the bird had been flying. This had led him to conclude that the birds were likely bulletproof. Waters also told Art Bell that this Nevada hole occasionally emitted what he described as a black beam, which shoots into the heavens in short bursts. He said, "This is a contradiction, but a black beam of light, okay, comes from the hole. It lasts a very short time, but it goes directly up into the sky. It's like if you had a flashlight and it was capable of throwing up solid black." In the years that followed Waters' revelations concerning the first hole, there had been sporadic expeditions into the woods around Monastash Ridge, but no one has ever managed to find the mystical pit, and Waters himself seems just as enigmatic. In the past few years, Water had largely been off the proverbial radar, but on June 28, 2011, a letter from someone claimed Waters was posted online by the Whales in Space website. His comments are spoken here in verbatim. "Hello to all of you. This is Mel. I'm sorry I've been inconspicuous for so long, but you see, I had to put my life back together after my experiences with the hole. I returned to Australia to renew my efforts with the Wombat Refuge after finally receiving a large settlement from the BLM. I had not spoken of the hole or its property since my last conversation with Art on Coast to Coast as part of my agreement with the U.S. government. I can, however, discuss generally the second hole I discovered in Nevada while living among the Basque people there. I can assure you that everything I told Art and his listeners regarding that hole were true. Out of respect for the local culture, though, I cannot reveal its location without their consent, and they do not wish it to be so. The elders there see the hole as a sacred place and would not want it compromised by outsiders and media. I can say that my experiences there changed my life, and I don't regret any of them. I hope that someday I'll be able to reveal everything in a way that will allow the public to know the truth, but I'm not in a position to do so at the present. I will say I believe the truth will be known one day, but I can't say how. I could prove my story, but the risk to myself is too great, and I've learned from my experiences that when I get an offer, it's best to take the money and run. I hope you all understand, and maybe you'll hear from me again sooner or later." But whether or not there's an ounce of truth in the stories aired on the now iconic Coast to Coast AM, the story of Mel Waters and his hole will continue to attract new listeners and searchers, hoping to find his elusive, mysterious pit. Thank you all for listening. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next Mystery Files every Monday and Wednesday here on Unknown Territory. Have a good night.